welcome to the Mayor and City Council Workshop for the month of November in the city of Taneytown. I'm going to ask Mayor Pro Tem Vigliotti to lead us in the pledge this evening.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Let the records reflect that all council members are present and accounted for this evening. Before we begin review of the minutes, I do wish to read the record of the closed meeting we held last Wednesday. For the record, November 2nd, 2022 at 7:40 p.m., the council voted to go into a closed session with the motion by Councilmember Foster, second by Councilmember Fuller. With those in attendance voting in favor, Councilman Hand was absent for the vote but arrived at 7:37 p.m. In accordance to the Maryland Open Meetings Act, Title 10, Governmental Procedures, Subtitle 5, Meetings, Section 3305B, this meeting was closed in order to discuss the appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of appointees, employees, or officials over whom it has jurisdiction, or any other personnel matter that affects one or more specific individuals. Topics discussed were a personnel complaint. Those present at the closed session were all members of council, as well as the mayor, city manager Wieprick, clerk Kalman, attorney Gullo, and attorney Karpinski were virtual. Actions taken at the closed session was appointing Robert Mitchell as acting chief of police until such time as a new chief is hired, with a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Vigliotti, second from Councilman Haynes, and carried 5-0. Motion to adjourn was at 8:33 p.m. by Councilman Haynes, second by Councilwoman Foster, and carried unanimously 5-0. Mr. Gullo, does that satisfy the reading of the record?
That's perfect.
Perfect. With that, I'm going to go to council for review of the minutes of the October 5th combined meeting, the October 5th closed session, and the November 2nd open and closed sessions. Is there any discussion on those minutes this evening? All right, hearing no discussion, those will be up for your approval on Monday evening. Next order of business, we have reception of delegations, CQI Association, a solar feasibility assessment. I believe Richard Anderson is one of the gentlemen seated before us this evening.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. With that, I'm going to ask Mr. Wieprick, can you give us a brief introduction as to why we're here tonight?
Sure. Several months ago, when we were talking about our ARPA money, the topic of using renewable energy for our Public Works Department, specifically focused on the wastewater treatment plant as a way to possibly reduce our long-term costs for energy there, came up. Ultimately, we decided to spend the ARPA money on more sewer conveyance system and water system projects to reduce our I&I as a more urgent need. But we had already started the ball rolling on the investigation into solar. So we're still interested in doing that, and tonight's presentation is to share with us the feasibility of where we can locate panels, how much energy we could produce compared with what we use at the various facilities, and options on financing, power purchase agreement, that sort of thing that we've talked about probably several years ago. But this is an updated look at it, and with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson, please proceed.
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to thank you all we've been your consultant in energy and energy procurement for close to 14 years. We appreciate this assignment. The goal of this assignment was to do a broad-based assessment of all your facilities to determine which ones provided the opportunity for development of solar projects. And we went a little bit beyond where we would traditionally be just at looking at buildings and looked at what the holistic approach would be to bring solar overall for your needs. Just to give you some background, there's two ways to construct solar that you all need to look at. One is what we call net account meters. These are behind the meter. So basically, this building has a meter outside. We would build solar that would be on this side of the meter that would help offset the energy for the building. So that's what would traditionally be maybe at your home. So it's called behind the meter solar or net meter. The other thing that is possible, particularly for you all, is something called aggregate net metering. This would be the ability to build a solar site somewhere else in the BGE service area that would be financed by a third-party provider. And then the solar that's generated there would be significant enough to potentially offset all of your accounts in your service area. And therefore, what they would actually do is take each bill and allocate to the bill a deduct on the solar production. So aggregate net metering has been around for a number of years. You all, as a government entity, can take advantage of this. Commercial businesses can't take advantage of this. And multiple municipalities and counties have begun to really use this as a much broader way of bringing solar into the portfolio. And we'll talk a little bit more about where that is. There are multiple ways to finance solar. One is you can just do a straight cash outlay from capital improvement funds. But traditionally, government agencies use something called a power purchase agreement. A power purchase agreement says that you would actually enter into a contract with a third-party provider, usually a major solar developer, contractor. They would own, operate, finance, permit, build, construct, maintain a solar system, and that your only obligation would be to pay for per unit cost per kilowatt hour the generated energy. The one thing about a power purchase agreement, they're typically long-term, so they'd be over 20 years. So that's a big stumbling block that some people have. But the reason you do a power purchase agreement is the third-party provider can take advantage of all of the federal investment tax credits that are there. Today, under the new legislation that was passed under the Inflation Act, that tax credit went from 22% to 30%. It was going to end at the end of this year. It now ends in 2030. And there's also additional incentives for Buy America and using prevailing wage that increases that percentage. So what the third-party provider can do is take advantage of those tax credits, take advantage of that in the profit in their tax-based market, and provide that back to you in a lower cost per unit. So that's why a power purchase agreement is there. You all cannot qualify for the federal investment tax credit being a government agency. And therefore, that is really the preferred methodology for doing any kind of solar, either on-site through behind the meter or this other concept of aggregate net meter. Any questions on that at this moment? I mean, you can finance it, but you really don't get the full advantage of moving forward with that. In this third-party thing, the third-party provider finances, owns, operates the system. The financer is eligible for all the federal investment tax credits that I just discussed, along with an accelerated depreciation rate. When their rate is charged back to you, it's lower than the traditional rate. And just for a moment, remember this 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That would be what is right now in the market, what a traditional power purchase agreement would be if we're going to build the system at the wastewater plant or if we were going to do an aggregate metering system. Want to be real clear as a starting point. You're currently in an electricity contract at a rate of 6,390. Everybody see that in that first column under 2023. Mm-hmm. In comparison where this market is today, that is an extremely favorable rate, and it goes until the midpoint of 2025. It's been really advantageous to have signed in 2019 this 5-year contract. Right now, the market rate that you would have to pay for a renewal contract is 10.0460. And it looks like the next six years, the market's going to hold up at this high point. So we anticipate when you do a renewal contract in 2025, that we're going to have a significant price increase at the 10.460 maybe 9.5, but this is best what we're seeing. So this is a short-term, you're doing very well, but long-term, by the year 2025 in your budget, you're going to see almost a 50 to 60% increase in your electricity rate and cost across the board. Everybody and the reason is the war, our extraordinary exports of natural gas overseas to support Europe, inflation, and supply curtailment. So all of these are the reasons why the market, since February of this year, has basically tripled in price. When we're looking at what is the measurement for solar, it basically says, what is the bundled rate that you're paying? It's that 969. And ultimately, at a bundled rate, if you don't do anything with your electricity contract, or if you do a new electricity contract in 25, your bundled rate will be 1383, and we'll come back to what that means. Does everybody understand this situation? And even if we don't do solar, as your energy procurement provider, I just want to kind of continue to alert you. We're alerting every customer that we're seeing these significant increases over the next 6 years. So this is something that and solar is going to help us a great deal. Remember what I just said. The power purchase rate is 8.5 cents. So that's kind of where we're at there.
And that 8.5 cents is compared to the bundled rate, correct?
Yeah, that's an all-in number. So it's pretty close to that, Mayor. There's a few other a few other utility delivery charges that are there, but they're significantly lower.
Okay.
So our first assignment was to go out to the wastewater treatment plant, look at a behind-the-meter system. We walked the plant, we talked to the folks out there, and there's basically, it looks like we could do up to 6 sites, Site A, B, D, and C, that are ground mount solar systems. Particularly the area A and B are excess areas that they don't see any future development. The D is somewhat problematic in that there is a stormwater management pond there, but we could still build in that area. C, they don't think there's going to be a long-term development there, but it's a much smaller system. They also have built a brand new building. It's structurally sound, and it has a real good opportunity to do a roof-mounted system there. So that's what the other two, if you'll see, the rooftop systems. And this next slide just basically shows you the A, B, C, D ground mounts, what they could produce from the solar system. The first one, 296,000 kilowatt hours. So the total that could be produced by these 6 locations is 705,000. The wastewater treatment plant uses 1,584,000. It's your largest electricity consumer. So solar, based on the land area that you have within the fenced area and so forth, could at least offset 44% of your wastewater treatment plant's ongoing energy needs for the 20-year power purchase agreement period, if this were so elected as one of the locations. We see this as as a favorable location as we move forward for the development of behind-the-meter solar. The second location that everyone wanted us to look at was at Memorial Park. The one issue at Memorial Park is there's only a few buildings there that consume energy. They only consume 83,569 kilowatt hours. What we looked at is what would the maximum area that we could build solar? So in the parking lot, we could build canopy solar parking. And then behind those residents and in front of the tennis courts, we could do 2 ground mount systems. A total of 1,101,730 kilowatt hour systems between all of them. When we really started to talk to the Parks Department, when you really look at it, they felt as though the 2 ground mount systems may prohibit future development. Another issue that we always find that's problematic is when you start building solar immediately behind a residential home, that creates some issues. The parking canopies are good options. People love to park under parking canopy solar, and that might be the best viable option there. And it would be about 228,000. But remember, we are going to be producing more here than we have facilities. So we would do some kind of combination of trying to meet the needs of the facilities, the 83,000, and then look at the option to maybe do something else with that additional difference between the 118,000. The other option that we initially looked at, and it looked somewhat favorable, was to build canopy parking on the parking lot behind the police headquarters, as it shown in this diagram over those two parking areas. It would basically allow for 50% of the annual use to be offset by these two parking canopies. People, everywhere we've had parking canopies built, people love to park their cars under them. It provides all kinds of benefits. But as we went through the process and got staff review, we found out that there's a potential to build an addition, as shown in that on the view on the right-hand side, and that addition basically would pretty much prohibit the ability to put those parking canopies there. The back area where is a truck turnaround, a stormwater management pond, an impoundment fence area. So really there's no ability to build solar there. So we've pretty much pulled the police department idea off the table in our overall recommendations, as we'll follow in a few minutes. But at least I wanted you to be aware that we had looked at this. And if the police headquarters isn't expanded, then maybe the option is there, but I think we have a better solution for you to consider as we move forward. So what we did then was we kind of totaled up where things are. And let me talk about this aggregate net metering option. What you can do is not here in town, maybe just outside of town, maybe on a farm that's there. I think you've started to see some farms between here and Westminster that are being developed with solar fields. Those solar fields are basically aggregate net metering solar fields that somebody else is building and exporting the power back into the utility and then crediting back to the city accounts. You have 64 accounts, and we think there's an opportunity to partially allocate solar from this off-site farm to some of those 64 in one of these, or all of them in the third option that we're going to show you. Does everybody understand this idea of this exporting? Now, you could build those large systems at the Memorial Park, but if you built those really large systems, they would be first tied back into the utility, and then the utility would allocate that solar back to the 64 city accounts. So the first option we looked at would be to build a behind-the-meter system at the wastewater plant that would offset 705,886 kilowatt hours. And at Memorial Park, basically build that really big system with all of that you saw that would produce 1,900,000 kilowatt hours, and allocate that to about a third of your other accounts. So all of your other large accounts, to include the police headquarters, this building, all of the others would be allocated through that system, and it would entail building that ground mount, the stuff behind the house, then the canopy. And that option in the first years doesn't pay back real well because you're a favorable rate, but by the third year, there's a significant savings of $78,000, and over a 20-year power purchase agreement, there would be a savings of $1,306,000. So there is an economic benefit to doing this solar overall. With the wastewater, you can see by both the offset of the $390,422. And when you do on-site solar, so that when we do on-site solar, you do not pay that same proportionate energy use for delivery. So you're basically 2.5 cents of your delivery costs at wastewater do not have to be paid to the utility. So that's why that additional savings is there of the $15,200 a year. Did everybody follow that? I hope you did. The second option would be to build the wastewater treatment plant site, fully developed to 705,000, and build a much larger system off-site that would be able to produce the balance of the solar at 284,713. Your annual consumption of all of your accounts, including wastewater, is 3,320,000. So basically, we would be able to have the entire city's energy produced by an off-site solar system and partially by an on-site system at the wastewater treatment plant. The net savings, having to pay the difference between the 10 cents bundled rate and the 8.5-cent bundled rate, would be $2,188,000. And we have very detailed cost sheets in our report that show you these summary charts year to year, month to month, cost to cost, delivery, and so forth. It's just very complicated to produce those up on this chart. So I just wanted to do the summaries. The last option is forget about doing wastewater, police, anything at Memorial Park, and issue a request for proposal for all of the city's needs in a net aggregate metering proposal, having a third-party vendor build that system somewhere in Maryland and allocate that energy back to the system and offset the entire 3,390,000 kilowatt hours. Its savings is $1,880,300 in this scenario. Now, we think this option here, the one that we see, the CQI preferred option, is the one that we're recommending for your consideration, and that is to go ahead and build as much as you can at wastewater first. That makes sense for the plant. It may not be the whole system there, but at least it would be the two larger ground mounts and the rooftop system that's there, and then do a request for proposal for third-party vendors who would build an off-site system for the balance of the city's needs in this 20-year power purchase agreement. And you can see this combined total of savings is $288,530, with a large contribution of that being the offset of not having to pay any delivery costs for to the utility, because we're not buying any power from the utility for the system that we have for the solar at the site. The all-in option that I just expressed to you, just to give you more information, would be 64 accounts. The annual consumption is 3,390,000. What the city would need to do is to issue a request for proposal. You would get multiple vendors to provide proposals to you. You would need an evaluation committee, go through that whole selection process, because this is a large procurement. It's complex. You want to make sure you're comfortable with the long-term relationship of 20 years. In 20 years, we're not all going to be here, so we want to make sure our predecessors have the good comfort that we did the best due diligence in this. So that's an important thing. The current bundled rate is $969. The future bundled rate, as I showed you before on that first chart, would be $1383. We're looking at a comparative bundled rate of 8.5 to 9 cents. And that rate would be the rate the first year with a 2% escalator. We've calculated that into the savings, but what you're basically doing is locking in an electricity contract for 20 years at long-term budget stability, well below market rates today, and I would say in the foreseeable future. Just one last piece of this, and I hope you all know this. The legislature passed a Climate Solutions Act, Now Act 22 in April. That act basically says that all Maryland businesses and governments have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2031, and that is measured against your 2006 baseline, not 2016, 2006. And the state hopes to be at net zero by 2045. The legislation will, have multiple steps in here. Large buildings of 35,000, you're going to have to start reporting where you are in 2025. They're going to want broader electrification. And at some point, if you don't do what they are asking, they're going to start charging you a carbon offset fee, and it could be as high as $51. And it could actually, for the city, and we've kind of preliminary figured out where you are, it'd be a fee of about $150,000. If you did the wastewater treatment plant, you would offset your carbon emissions by half of what you already are using. If you did the offset for the aggregate net metering, you might be at net zero, but carbon neutral by the time that system were fully developed, possibly by 2025, 2026. So there is a double benefit in trying to look at the option for solar, even partial solar at the wastewater, if that's all you wanted to do, would give you the largest benefit of that. To do other projects in heating, air conditioning, lighting, they're just going to be little pieces to get to that 3,000 megaton reduction that you're going to need by the beginning of the program. So for your consideration, I think you need to think about whether construction of a solar system is financially viable and economically benefit to the city. If you feel that way, then there are multiple options. You should select the option that we presented, or we can come back and talk to you about these options in more detail to determine which one will provide the longest economic benefit on a long-term basis. And just basically proceed forward under your guidance as to where you want to go. To do both of these projects, you would probably need to do a competitive bid through your procurement department, issuing a request for proposal and going through the whole selection process, because they are, as I said to you earlier, complicated, and you want to make sure you're comfortable with all the process. Both of these systems with a 20-year power purchase agreement would also require significant legal review and making sure that you're all comfortable with this agreement. We've got multiple templates of how that's worked. We have 14 projects that have already gone through this process. We have 4 city projects right now that are in the, actually we have one that just this morning approved a power purchase agreement for 20 years. So this is not something that's uncommon. You can talk to a number of your colleagues and they can give you the advice that you need. And we would be guiding you through the power purchase agreement review as needed. I think that kind of summarizes where I hope to be with this, but please, I'm open for questions at this moment.
All right, members of council, do you have any questions after that presentation?
I guess I have a general question, and if you don't have a specific answer to this, that's okay. Do you have any sense of the rapidity at which the solar photovoltaic technology improves over time? For example, if we were to enter into some kind of agreement and a certain batch of panels was installed, at what rate would those be obsolescent?
The panels themselves are all the manufacturer warranties are now 20 years. So they would fall into that 20-year power purchase agreement. Some are even coming out to be guaranteed for 25 years. So the panels themselves are pretty resilient. Yes, you'll have 1 or 2 that break. But in a power purchase agreement, all the responsibility for maintenance, care, replacement, and so forth is not yours. It's all there. It's borne by the provider. The inverters, which convert the DC power from the cell to AC power, it's a big box that sits there. They're 10 years. They tend to be the thing that wears out. In the power purchase agreement, the provider has to continue to upgrade them throughout the performance period. So about every 10 years, they would come in and actually change them out. It's not yours, but that's the weak link into the overall solar program right at this point. Now, solar cell production per kilowatt improves at about 10% per 6 months. But, you know, there's a point when if they come in and say, we can produce a solar system that produces 3,390,000, which is what you need based on this cell, then you're kind of good to go with this, with it. The other thing that we insist, if you have us involved in the power purchase agreement, is the provider must provide a 90% performance guarantee over the 20 years. And that basically says, if we're counting on you to produce, we want you to produce. If you don't produce, you have to pay us back a check because we're gonna have to buy that power some other way. And so we'll be buying that power at 10 cents and we were trying to pay you at 9. You have to make up the difference in that. So but solar providers constantly maintain their systems because they want it to perform at the 95% level because that's how they make their money. Remember, they don't make only money from you based on what they sell you back as produced solar. Okay, now they make money based off of that investment tax credit right off the first of the year. Half of their investment is written off by the federal government in tax credits and depreciation and basically the new law. So that's one of the advantages. That advantage comes to you also in a lower rate. So that's really, I hope that I've answered your question as best I can at this
Oh,
moment.
absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And one more question, if I might.
Yeah.
You'd referenced earlier the issues with the supply of fuel, natural gas, et cetera. So talking about this with the 20-year rate that we locked in, I mean, there is the potential that the rate that we are locked into could exceed what we might otherwise be paying based on the supply of energy and based on the energy market, correct?
Yes, it's always a possibility.
Okay.
Okay. But if, where your current rate is, which was locked in 2019, and if we just did a traditional, a normal cost increase, let me make sure I got the number correct. So you're at a 6,390. So if it only went up, 4 or 5% per year, you would be in about the 8.5% rate at this 2025. The projections that we have, the detailed projections that we have here, is we're escalating this supply rate at 2% every 2 years, and it still gives us the positive payback. So, we believe, unfortunately, I think the new energy market is where we are today. Okay, I don't think we're going to see it curtailed too much. Everything really will depend on this winter in Europe as to really what the next 4 or 5 years look like. In the normal market, I would say that your renewal at 2025 would still be about 8.5 cents, without all this that has happened. Our projection now, well, we know what we're constantly pricing every day. We have municipalities all over the country that are in the program. And we're seeing rates right now in the 10.4 range. Have we had any in the 9.8? Not recently. So, but yes, but that if the program meets your budget long term, and it gives you budget stability, that's the more important thing for you to look at. Is it make sense?
Well, what you said makes sense, absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously, meeting budget expectations is certainly different than exceeding what we're hoping for.
Right.
And so I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm good, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First question is, if we did a behind the meter at the wastewater treatment plant with a 20-year, at the end of 20 years, what happens? I mean, the panels are still there. They're no longer under warranty. Does the provider just walk away?
No, in the power purchase agreement, it basically says on that termination date, they have 180 days. They have to remove them, restore the site back to its original condition.
Or replace them under a new agreement?
Or, yeah.
Okay.
But I will say.
Unless they're still usable. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you might have the option to purchase it, but, you know, a lot of the providers want 25-year programs or 30-year programs, and we've pretty much said, I don't think that's a good idea. I think 20 years is about as long as we want to go. And my vision is 20 years from now, back to your question is, I think solar will have a whole different look potentially. And so you would want a new technology, or your predecessors would want to consider a new technology. But right now, the power purchase agreement would have this 180-day terminate at the end of the termination to remove it. Now, we've had some other people who have been very concerned with this, particularly Montgomery County Parks and Planning Commission were concerned, 20 years, what, you know, that company may go bankrupt, they may not be around, whatever. They did a value assessment on the solar panels if they were just to, and the structure, and they basically found that they would double, the value that they could sell the panels back into the market and to the steel would be double what the cost would be to remove it. So then that gave them this comfort level that, hey, this, we're not hamstringing ourselves into the process.
So what other environmental impacts are we going to have regarding stormwater management if we're covering ground with these panels? What effect does this have environmentally?
Well, Carroll County is right now very stringent across the board on stormwater management, as you probably, as you know. And it will be the longest lead time in our approval process under the solar project. And we worked with Carroll County Public Schools for that South Carroll High School solar system. Have you seen the one that's right there on?
Right.
I mean, yes, South Carroll, up on top of the hill. Stormwater was the biggest issue, and that held up the process. At the wastewater plant, with that large retention pond that's there, and with the way the ground is sloping, I'm not sure, I don't think it'll be a significant problem. The biggest issue that everybody says is the ground under the solar considered an impervious surface or not.
Right.
And Carroll County has now come back and has now agreed that it's not, that it's a porous surface. They are requiring some other things to be done. But I think it, and we're also far enough back from the stream that's just on the other side where the old plant used to be, that I think it's going to be the only major environmental concern. We're out of the floodplain, we're out of all of the other setbacks, and just realizing that Carroll County will put us through our ringer in the stormwater.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
There's no possible leaching of metals, chemicals, anything like that from these systems?
No.
That, okay.
No, not that we've been aware of. The oldest system that we've worked with is now 14 years old. I mean, solar is still fairly new.
It is, right.
Yeah, so it's a new technology. And we've seen no issues like that. I mean, really the only issue is every once in a while a panel will crack for whatever reason. Inverters do go down, but there hasn't yet been some negative environmental issue that we've been aware of.
Okay.
Or made aware of. And we're pretty in touch with it all around the country.
Okay.
I mean, you do canopy parking, the only other issue that comes up with canopy parking is the fire departments, will come back in and really want to know how to fight the fire with the canopy and the car underneath. And
Right.
we've built a whole protocol on how to do that. Our first canopy parking project where we did that was at T. Rowe Price headquarters. Have you seen the canopy parking on their parking garage? Actually, we did a whole new program on firefighting with the Baltimore County Fire Department, so it's there. And there's an emergency button that the fire department will require to be located, even at the wastewater plant, where they can come and just hit it, and the whole system goes down. So that's the second group.
So talking about the canopy at the park, that sort of idea, how does liability work, being that it's on city property over vehicles that are parked there? What liability is it? Is it all in the city then? If something happens and structurally it fails, it falls, whatever that is, or is that on the provider whose panels there are? I know we're getting into some legal weeds, but that's kind of a...
We just went through this for, we're building, we have a major operation in Decatur, Illinois, all throughout Illinois. And for the city of Decatur, we're putting a canopy parking on their big parking lot in front of their civic center. And it was a concern. We were able to go to a shared liability issue between the provider, both are covering insurance, and it seemed to legally work out where everybody was, agreeable to it. And I could give you and your attorney more details on the exact language that's there. And it seemed to have, it was the one major concern, and it seems to have we've been able to work our way through that. Okay.
Understood.
Okay, but Mary, you're right. The canopy, the structure, the canopy is owned by a third party.
Right.
They have to, they're insured on that whole thing. If it falls onto the vehicle, it's their problem. If a fire occurs below in the car, then that issue could be the owner of the car, the city. So, there's language that needs to be,
Of course, right.
constructed out. Yes.
Right.
Where it's different at a T-Row Price, where they own the whole thing. You know what I mean? That,
Right.
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay. But and just to stress with you, the devil's in the detail of the power purchase agreement. So it's incumbent upon your leadership team, your staff team to really focus on that as making sure it's right, it's complete, it's got all the terms and conditions, and that the folks that are going to be here 15 years from now can open it up and really understand what you did at that point. So, and
Any other questions from council? Did staff have anything else?
Sure, just some clarification if you would. You talked early on about the various incentives that will benefit the third-party provider to construct the facility and be able to bring that in at a lower price than we could, not being eligible for those. But you also talked about the upfront cost and a competitive bidding process. So with the power purchase agreement, wouldn't the builder be footing the bill for constructing the system so they get those tax credits and everything?
oh, yes.
So would the
I think I
city-
might have confused you. The request for proposal was on the city to issue a request proposal to ask for vendors to submit proposals to you. They would then be responsible after selection and signing the power purchase agreement to do everything, to develop it, finance it, permit it, all those various phases. Once it's fully operational, they would do all the maintenance, maintain the system all the way throughout the 20-year period, do the preventive maintenance, all the things that they would need, and then be responsible for the removal of the system at the end of the day. So that,
Okay,
you know that. The big benefit of the solar right now may be also the greenhouse gas emissions reduction that you might be mandated to at some point in the future. Your wastewater treatment plant's going to fall into in the initial category of one of the first facilities that you're going to have to start reporting on. So,
Right.
okay.
So when it comes to an off-site solar farm, whatever, that we do an agreement with, what are the restrictions on its location? Does it have to be within the same service area that
Yes,
we are?
yes.
Okay, so it can't be on a BGE, it would have to be on a Potomac Edison?
Yes,
It would be,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it would be Potomac Edison. We've gone back to Potomac Edison. They're permitting them now. They weren't for a while. And so, it's an option, it's something that we would have to, make sure they're comfortable with again, but yes. Now, with that system, it's totally off-site. You have no liability.
Right,
Your only liability with that off-site system is to pay for the generated energy
right,
and make sure that the utility company is crediting every month the solar production on your bills. The South Carroll High School system is actually an aggregate net meter system. It's not a behind-the-meter system. It couldn't be connected easily to the high school because the fire department and the Parks Department was in the middle of their athletic fields. So that solar is being generated, brought down and put onto the power poles at the road, and then being reallocated back to South Carroll and to Century High School. I couldn't remember that name for a second. So it's done regularly that way.
Understood.
Thank you all very, very much. It's always a pleasure working with you all. Thank you.
Appreciate your time, and we'll discuss as a council and see what we come back with, okay?
Okay, thank you. And I'm willing to come back at any time and have further discussions with you.
I have a feeling we'll take you up on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
All right. Annually, the month of November is Municipal Government Works Month. We celebrate every year to highlight the work of municipal government. As a part of that, it's my honor to share a proclamation with you. That being, whereas the city of Taneytown was established in 1754, and whereas the city of Taneytown is one of 157 municipalities incorporated in the state of Maryland, and whereas the mayor and city council recognize and celebrate that municipal government represents the most responsive level of government, allowing citizens to have direct access to elected officials. And whereas in an effort to educate citizens about municipal government and the importance of their participation, the city of Taneytown is proud to promote municipal government awareness. And whereas municipalities have enhanced the quality of life for their respective residents, maintaining natural and historic sites and structures, and helping to make Maryland a great place to live, work, play, and explore. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Mayor and City Council of the City of Taneytown, Maryland, hereby joins the Maryland Municipal League in declaring November to be Municipal Government Works Month in Taneytown. And that is signed as of today by myself. You'll notice we do have a new flag flying out front that is recognizing Municipal Government Works Month. So thank you all for entertaining me as we went through that. I'll now ask members of the council if they have any conflicts of interest on anything on the agenda this evening.
No, sir.
No, sir. All right, very good. I'll now open it up to public comment on anything not on the agenda this evening. That was on the agenda.
That was on it.
Yeah. Anyone with non-agenda items? Well, you know, with that, why don't you come up and just speak it? That way you don't have to say the whole time if you don't want to. You know?
I just had a couple of things I wanted to bring up, just based on what I saw in the presentation. Chris Tillman, Georgia's on York, 10 York Street. I had a couple of things that came to my mind during the presentation that you know, I know, I'm hoping you all are thinking about all of these things, but the one thing that really came to my mind is that there was no discussion about canopies in the lot over here at Riffles Lane. You know, why would we not consider that lot as a place to have them? And I'm wondering if you're putting the canopies over a paved lot, does that resolve some of the stormwater management issues because you're already putting it over an impervious surface that one assumes has all the correct stormwater management. You know, certainly I'm glad to see that they don't recommend the panels in the park. I think when you go putting a bunch of solar panels in the park, it no longer becomes a park. The other thing that I will bring up, which doesn't really have to do with this presentation, but I know that there has been a lot of chatter in the last 2 days about a big solar farm at Brown Road. And that's, you know, I know Joe has brought up many times about that impact area of a mile out of the city. And has the county been in touch with the city, and has there been any discussion about the impact of that development on city business and city life? So with that, I'll thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Anyone else on non-agenda items? Okay. We shall move into Ordinance 08-2022, amendments to the ethics ordinance. I believe I'm going to go to Mr. Gullo to kind of guide us through these.
So we talked about this last month. The ordinance has not changed. It was submitted after you introduced it last month to the State Ethics Commission. The counsel for the State Ethics Commission reviewed it, said, yeah, he agrees that we have met all the muster on it, and has submitted it to the State Ethics Commission for their approval, and they meet this month, I think the 19th or something this month. And so it's unlikely they're going to have anything but an approval, and so if that happens, then we will adopt it in December. So,
Okay, but there were no additional changes since we saw it last month?
No.
Correct. All right, questions from the council regarding that? Okay, with that, we'll remove it from the agenda for Monday evening since there's no action required, and we'll see it again next month. For introduction, we have ordinance 09-2022, amendment to restricted general business district. This is being sent to us from the Planning Commission with their thoughts. Mr. Weeprick, do you want to guide us through what they've sent to us here?
Certainly. As soon as I find the right one. Okay. Okay, so the restricted general business district, the mayor tasked the planning commission and I with, and zoning administrator Hale, with taking a look at that district and trying to come up with some additional uses to address a concern of one property in particular, I guess, that's on the market right now. Long story short, the commission took a look at things and decided that adding a little bit more flexibility like we have in some of the other zoning districts by adding language for other similar businesses to the categories that are already in the ordinance. And I'll apologize, I know it says the new text is italicized and underlined,
And it was.
and it's not underlined, so I apologize for the
I
formatting
kept
there.
looking, where is it?
Yeah, so it's italicized, for example, on line 65 is one of the inserted lines, other similar businesses. It also appears on line 82. And then also we added a residential category that would allow single-family detached dwellings. So that's actually going back to what was permitted by right many years ago when that area was R7500. I don't know that anyone sitting here today was around when that was updated from R75 to the restricted general business district. But again, prior to that, single-family dwellings were a permitted use in that block. So we thought that based on the lot size and the fact that there are several dwellings there, that may be a reasonable use for properties when they do go on the market. So we wanted to make clear while a residence can continue indefinitely, even if the zoning changes, if I lived in a residential district and the city changed that zoning to something commercial or industrial, as long as that house continues as a residence, it can go on indefinitely. But there are a couple properties, a couple lots that didn't have houses before, and maybe a house would be a good use for that lot. So this would allow that to happen. And also we added special exceptions of child and adult daycare centers, or as a special exception, a semi-detached dwelling. That wouldn't be out of character with other properties along that, quarter mile or so of East Baltimore Street. So, but again, that would be a special exception use, so that would go before the Board of Appeals. So those were the commission's suggestions on broadening what you can do in that district a little bit. The language that's in there is a little bit constraining in that it talks about, let's see, I'm trying to see. Okay, we're not amending that particular section. The language in there is not as open-ended as some of the other districts. So typically where we list a bunch of things, it's to be illustrative but not all-inclusive. Not to say that if it's not on this list, you can't do it. So it's the zoning administrator's role to determine, if it's a widget shop and the code doesn't specifically say widgets, he's got to determine, if that's close to other uses that are listed. But again, adding that language about other similar uses provides a little latitude there. So that was basically the gist of it. And, if you guys like what's before you, we can introduce it. It'll, of course, go back to the Planning Commission for their comment officially now, and then it will come back for a public hearing here, potentially in December. And we'll, hear from the public who didn't, who hasn't commented at the Planning Commission level already, or maybe the same people. So that's if you like the idea that's before you.
Was there any discussion with Planning Commission regarding the building size and a special exception process for larger than 5,000 square feet?
So a variance would be possible currently. The Board of Zoning Appeals can hear a variance request for setbacks and bulk size, things like that. There wasn't a lot of discussion about it. 5,000 square feet that's listed in there now is it keeps the scale of potential buildings there compatible with the other properties that are, with the other buildings that are on that lot. So I think part of the intent of that district initially was to not have it be, a high-intensity, large-scale use adjacent to other dwellings. And we obviously have not seen the pressure to convert dwellings to businesses that I guess was anticipated when the ordinance was enacted many years ago, when the change was made. We have seen the property that brought this before us back in, 2000 or whenever it was, converted. And since then, one other property converted from a dwelling to a business, the insurance office that's on the corner of Fairground and East Baltimore. But all the other properties have remained in the same use that they were, 15, 16 years ago or longer. So we just tried to add a little flexibility to it while still kind of keeping the general intent of the district. So there has been some talk, as you know, of rezoning that district to be general business. And, again, that if that's the area where you want to see the next convenience store, gas station, or drive-through, food service, then general business is an appropriate district for that. But if that's not the best place in the city for that, probably not something to really be entertaining right now.
All right, members of council.
Just a very brief question, and it may just be a typographical error, but between lines 56 and 58, I see I listed twice. And I don't know whether that's because something is going to go in there or whether it really is just a simple typographical error.
I believe that's a typo.
Okay.
All right, other questions of the non-grammatical type? How do we feel? I mean, I'm kind of looking for responses altogether.
I think it's a step in the right direction.
Okay.
I'm in agreement. I think if we can make that area more flexible, okay. I think if the area can become a little more flexible in what we can permit there, I think it's going to end up being a better use for residents and for businesses.
But not general use.
Not general business.
Okay.
Correct, it's
Not
not.
like fast foods and gas stations.
Right.
So a step in the right direction. Do you have a recommendation for a second step? What would you like to see?
That we don't need to revisit this in 4 years.
Yes.
That's what we're looking for, is that we want to do the right thing long-term. Do you believe this is good long-term?
Yeah, I don't think I have the knowledge base to say that this is the best iteration it could possibly be. But I think as it stands now, I trust the Planning Commission's recommendation. I think this is solid, and I don't disagree with any part of it.
Councilman Hand, do you have anything additional from the Planning Commission?
No, sir.
It's all on paper.
It's there.
Any other input, questions, comments?
Works for me.
All right. Well, that will be up for introduction then on Monday evening. We're going to move right into ordinance 10-2022, amendment to yard exceptions.
Okay.
Mr. Weeprick?
This one, the new text is italicized and underlined and bolded. So basically, this addresses those corner lots where we have essentially a double front yard requirement to give some relief to the property owners to allow them to, specifically, this addresses fences, that they can use a little bit more of that equivalent front yard to erect a 6-foot fence to enclose a larger part of their yard than the code currently allows. Also currently, to reduce that equivalent front yard, there's an administrative process where the zoning administrator has to send certified letters to all the contiguous property owners. And if any one of those contiguous owners objects in writing, the zoning administrator can't grant a reduction. And the property owner's recourse will be to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a full-blown BZA hearing. So that takes a lot of effort and time, for the zoning administrator to do that. The applicant does pay the cost of the certified mail and such, so, it's really more a time commitment. But generally, we don't hear anything from the adjacent property owners. We might get a phone call saying, what's this about? And when it's explained, they're like, oh, okay, I don't really have a problem with it, is the typical reaction. But there are a few cases where when someone is advised, okay, well, we need to send letters around to everybody, and they look across the street at, a particular house and say, oh, I'm not going to do that then, because they might not be in good standing with, 1 out of 5 neighbors or something, and they don't expect that neighbor to go along with it. That does give the neighbors, a lot of control over the corner lot.
Someone else's property, right?
Right. So that said, we also don't want to go too far. So what's in here is to reduce by not more than 50% of the required front yard or equivalent front yard where the subject yard abuts a neighboring side yard. So that's the typical scenario where you have a corner lot, that house might face, one
Street A,
street.
right.
And then along Street B, which the equivalent front yard is fronting, the next house over, Street B, is their front yard.
Right.
So in that scenario, they could reduce that equivalent front yard by up to 50%. Where the equivalent front yard abuts another rear yard, so 2 houses that face away from each other and their backyards abut, that equivalent side yard could be reduced by up to 60%. We didn't feel comfortable going much beyond that because there we thought you could potentially start getting into sightline issues for the intersection on the corner lot. So the zoning administrator met members of the Planning Commission in the field at a corner lot and kind of marked out several spaces in the yard so that they could walk around, and this was arranged with property owner in advance that they were fine with people trampling around his side yard. And, and that's where they kind of settled on the 50 and the 60%. So there was talk of going 60% across the board, but then when you think about, if you're the house next door to that corner lot and you're looking out your front window, you're going to see, part of what is their equivalent front yard. And, you may not want to see the kids' swing set, enclosed by the 6-foot fence when you look out your front window, or at least not much past your front window. So a lot of thought went into it, and there was a good bit of discussion with the Planning Commission. And ultimately, we decided that, for that reason, as far as, the equivalent front yard is next door in a lot of cases to someone else's front yard, that we didn't want to deviate from the current process for accessory buildings. So the changes really just apply to giving somebody more of their yard to erect a 6-foot tall fence rather than a 4-foot fence.
So a 4-foot, they could take all the way out to their property line.
4-foot, they can take all the way out to the sidewalk. Maybe not advisable, but if somebody wanted to do that, we would issue the fence
They could.
permit
But the max they can do is 6 foot
in a residential
in a
district.
residential district. Okay.
Correct. So that's essentially it.
Ready?
Councilman Fuller is itching to say something.
So, okay, I just have 2 questions. Can you give me feet, just a general idea of the feet, the difference between the 50 and the 60, using the example that we had?
Okay.
3 feet? I mean, if it's a 30-foot setback, it would be a 3-foot difference between 50% and 60%. Am I correct?
So 50% gives somebody so instead of a 35-foot setback, which is typical in your R10, which is the vast majority of the subdivisions through town, so the 50% would be, 17 and a
17 and a
half
half
feet.
feet.
So
So it would be
it would be
14 feet.
21.
21.
Right, so they could use 21 feet of their side yard rather than 17 and a half. That's the difference between the 50 and the 60%.
And I guess not to harp on it more, it just seems like it would be simpler to keep it across the board 60. And the only reason I say that is because when you have that scenario, and I'm assuming when you moved in, you knew that your side yard was somebody's backyard. Like, why is it their responsibility to give them a better sight line with their yard? Because couldn't they just as easily plant a big old tree that would also create a sightline thing? And then they don't have to ask anybody about that. They could do a whole bunch of, cypress trees or, I'm curious, I like to keep things simple. I don't want to make it harder than it has to be and add more verbiage than we need.
So, I mean,
I
that
just,
You're not wrong, but
that
people
certainly is an option, but
to keep what I want.
entries, they want to put up a pretty fence.
Well, and I don't blame them.
They want a
because
white privacy
They
fence
want
that no one
privacy,
can.
it's
Right.
their yard. They should be allowed to have privacy, and and
Right.
again, I go back to,
And I think there certainly is, some aesthetic consideration involved. I know we don't technically regulate aesthetics, but we are talking about, the view out somebody's front window. And if we generally say you can't put a 6-foot-high fence in your front yard, and, I'm looking out my front window and my neighbor who has the corner lot, whose backyard abuts my front yard, if I can't put a 6-foot privacy fence out in front of my house, why does my neighbor get to?
well, and again, I would go because it's
So it's
not
kind
their
of a
front
balancing
yard.
act.
And
the reason for the 60 versus 50,
right. I mean, that few feet just doesn't
is-
seem like it really would make that much difference
That's-
considering you're not changing any of the buildings. You're not putting a shed over that
Right,
far.
right.
It's just the fence.
and in that situation, it's, you have 2 rear yards abutting each other, and you're going to have the ability for there to be, if both houses, that's a scenario where you only run into where there's a very small block, that houses rear yards on corner lots would abut each other. So in that scenario, there's the ability to go a little bit closer to the road, but also to have some, I guess, consistency, where it's not going to be, I don't know quite how to sum this up. I guess both houses then have the ability to push that, the extra few feet. Whereas with the other scenario, the house next door to the corner lot is very limited.
I mean, my concern is more just about the sight lines from the road and from driveways. It's
Well, and
it's
that's why I
less
asked
right.
about the
I mean,
feet, because it
that's
seems to me 14 feet is
Yeah.
plenty. You can almost pull out backwards and still have a sight line into the street.
In the typical subdivision that's built to our specs, with our street widths and stop bar placement and everything like that, the 60% potentially puts a fence right about at the equivalent of the stop bar and the stop sign placement at the intersection. If you start going much beyond that, now you're projecting out beyond where a car is going to stop at the stop sign and look to their right or left, to see if there's oncoming traffic. So that's why we really didn't go any farther beyond the 60%, because that tends to be about where the radius for the turn ends, and that's where the stop sign and the stop bar are usually placed.
So why not just make it all 50%? That's what I can't quite figure out.
That was going to be my default. If we wanted to be as simple as possible, I would say rather than default to 60, I'd default to 50.
Right.
Because from walking the area, imagining, let's say I had a front porch with a rocker, granted, as a homeowner, if I face this way and there's a backyard that way, of course I would have known what I was getting into, but until a fence goes up, you don't really realize, oh my gosh.
Right.
It's like all of a sudden you have a vibe of a city rather than
Well, and I know,
a suburban area.
And I
So
guess it just comes down to people having power over what you do with your yard. I just like to step away from that. Again, they could still plant a whole row of cypress trees, and would they then have the right to say, well, I don't like those trees, they block my view of your backyard?
If they did, they would go to civil court over that. I mean, the city wouldn't get involved, but I mean, it's
I just,
We'll
to me,
talk.
it's a fine line.
the door for more neighbor disputes that the city gets dragged into.
That's why I'm just saying.
Right.
If we
We'll
just
talk
set
offline
one
about that.
standard, be like, that's what it is. If you want your privacy in your backyard, here it is. This is it. And I don't want to take away more than
Yeah.
we
and
have to.
Please keep in mind that this portion of the yard exception text in the code is a relatively modern addition to the code. It was intended to provide some relief short of going to the Board of Zoning Appeals for something that was considered not a huge change to the property. That, what's the overall intent of the Board of Zoning Appeals? To give people an opportunity to comment and have a public process before something is decided.
Right.
That's why we hold the hearings, that's why we post the signs, that's why we send the notices out to everybody. So, but that is expensive to go through that whole process. And, if I'm gonna spend, $1,000 on my fence materials and I've gotta spend 60% of that to go before, the Board of Zoning Appeals, that I may or may not get my variance granted because I'm creating a hardship myself, I don't know what my chances are there. So this was seen as giving people a little opportunity for some relief. But largely, it's, more of an administrative burden than I think is necessary on the zoning administrator. When folks do learn about that yard exception, and we tell them about it, that, well, I can't issue that, but here's what, because you're a corner lot, yada, yada, but here's what we can do, that we can give you some relief. And it's time consuming, and then it delays the issue of the fence permit by a couple weeks also because there's a waiting period. And we'd like to get away from that.
So along with those certified letters, is the property posted as well?
Not for the yard exception,
Not for the art exception?
right? We just notify the contiguous property owners and wait to see if anybody has any questions or comments.
Where did the 15-day number come from?
I'm sorry, the 15?
The 15-day to respond.
Oh, I think that was just considered a reasonable time to get people, let people open their mail,
Right.
reach out to the city office, and then put something in writing if they, had a problem with it.
3 years ago, I would have thought that was a reasonable time, but things take longer now, so I'm just kind of, should it be 30? Of course, now people have to wait a month to put up a fence, and I'm just,
Now, and that's just for the buildings, right? That's
That-
just for
right.
sheds and stuff, right? We're
Right, that-
taking that off the table as far as the fences go.
Right, the sheds would be still subject to the existing process, yeah.
Okay.
I think we should make it all 50%. It would be simpler.
Yeah, but the wrong way.
you get an extra 7 feet.
It's better than what they have now.
Yeah,
I mean,
by 20%. Extra 7 feet. Go ahead and plant your bushes elsewhere.
So Councilwoman, it seems like you're not necessarily in favor of the 50%.
No, I think it should be, I think more is more reasonable. I mean, as long as it's a,
My opinion is it's already more.
but how is it? Again, and we had this conversation, I don't know if you were there for that, but when you're talking about, teenage girls in a pool, they have the right to have privacy with a 6-foot fence. If you have a dog, you want to keep people safe from the dog.
I understand.
whatever. But I don't think people go in buying a corner lot knowing that, oh, just in case, if you ever want a fence, it can't go out as far as your yard does. It can only go this far, which was really not far at all. To me, it's taking away something that they own. It's their yard. Why shouldn't they be allowed to put a fence up as long as it doesn't create a sightline issue?
Well, and my concern is that it would create a sightline issue if it's at 60%.
I really don't know.
I think potentially there are places there it could become one.
But that's when it's up to the zoning administrator to make sure that that isn't an issue, right? Doesn't he says that where's the word? Doesn't present a danger to public health and safety. So if he sees there's a scenario where that's not
Right.
applicable, then he would say, I realize that's what it says, but because of your sight line, because you're on a curve, here's how you have to do it. Didn't one would always want to err on the side of more freedoms than less?
While I certainly appreciate the idea of some flexibility, I also don't want to burden the zoning administrator with making a, sightline determination that could come back to haunt us if he approves something and there is an accident because somebody says, oh, that fence blocked my
I've seen a lot of
view.
drivers, though, that I
Now
don't
we
think they could have
have, so
100%
I would
sightline.
rather
Still
err
get
on the
that.
side of caution than
Right.
then subject the zoning administrator to additional pressure of, what do you mean? You can see fine at 60%, I just would rather not set up that scenario for him.
If we had it at 50, would that preclude someone from then going to the process that they already have been going through to try for 60? Because we're just looking for an easier process
Well,
would
right.
be at 50, like the
I mean,
the current 30.
someone can
but
always
they could
appeal
still
the
do
zoning
something more and
administrator's
ask
decision.
for more, but it would still be the
An option.
hoops that we were currently working through. So it's not like we're saying you can't do it. It's just you got to go through the hoops that we currently have.
And this is,
30.
and I'll defer to the city attorney on this one, but, this isn't actually a setback. This is a prohibition of something being in a front yard. It's a little different than an actual setback, which is a measurement from a property line. So I'm not sure if technically that, if a variance is a possibility on something like that, or, if I wanted to build a shed in my front yard and the code says accessory buildings can only go in the side or rear yard, I don't know if that qualifies as a variance or not.
It does not.
So somebody could appeal an error of the zoning administrator. They can always say that, oh, he messed up in denying my application, but they would, right.
Variances vary numbers, not terms. That's, pretty straightforward.
Right.
So what, in order, because I agree with you, Councilwoman, I would want to err more on the side of the freedom of the individual property owner, right? So is there I guess you would call it like a phrase or a type of language that you would like to see included that would allow what Councilman Hand was talking about, where you could, request the additional percentage of the yard? And you don't have to, not tonight, it doesn't have to be
I know,
tonight.
and that's it. I'd like to get it done sooner than later, too. So at this rate, I'd be fine with just leaving it as is.
As is
As
written.
is presented.
Yep. And that's fine. It makes sense the way that it's written. I understand how it is. It just takes one extra level of, but that's
Right, so.
what we have a zoning administrator for, and maps.
Yes, and we have, we have the technology available now that we didn't, 20 years ago. Now the zoning administrator can just, go on Google Earth or on the city's GIS or the county's GIS and look at that property and say, oh, okay, you're abutting a rear yard and not somebody else's side yard. You can do it without hopping in the truck and going to visit the site or hoping the tax map is right and looking up the parcel information and then trying to open the tax map, which they have, they are not always the most reliable as far as like where they send the little red dot when you try to view them online. So, but we have the ability now to, to go on our own GIS system and see, bird's eye view of that property. So, the zoning administrator has that ability now that we didn't have years ago. It's just a couple mouse clicks and you're there. So.
Further discussion from council? All right. Well, if we're satisfied with that, we'll introduce Monday evening. Also Monday evening, I'll be looking for adoption of Resolution 2022-14, the water allocation for the month of November. Mayor Pro Tem Vigliotti.
The math checks out, sir.
Perfect, thank you. Comments, questions from anyone else on the water allocations? It has struck me that that would be the final time I request of you the math on the water allocations.
We'll have to assign that duty to another member of council.
That's right.
Joe, I've been doing the math ever since you found that error.
All right, starting in December.
How many years ago was that? It's been a couple of years, hasn't it?
Mr. Haynes, Councilman Haynes, start bringing your abacus.
Will do.
Comically, I believe he actually does have an abacus. That's. I use a C in spell. All right. Mr. Weeprick, do you have a city manager report for us this evening?
Sure do. The first item on there, we already talked about with the equivalent front yards in the restricted general business district. One of the other code revisions we've been discussing recently has been that for the urban mix district that's on our comprehensive plan that we never adopted district regulations for. The primary property that's on the map in that land use category has recently sold. The fact that that was on the market was kind of our kick in the pants to try to get this moving. So we have been in touch with the new owners. They have a number of different ideas for the property. Currently, the zoning stands at restricted industrial. That doesn't really allow them to do what they would like to do. So we're hoping that we can, once they've settled on some potential uses, we're hoping that we can come up with something that is, works and satisfies their interests as well as, gets us where we wanted to go zoning-wise. So again, right now it is industrial, but I think they have other ideas for the property. So there are a couple other smaller properties that are in this land use category, but without the larger 22, I believe it is, acre parcel. It may not really make sense to adopt something that would just focus on the two properties. So we'll be having talks with the new owner there, but I'm optimistic from what the ideas they've floated. It sounds like they're generally aligned with what we were hoping to achieve. So that's I think a step in the right direction. Jumping down to Meadowbrook Interceptor. We finally got the grading completion certificate for that project. I guess the grass finally grew into the inspector's satisfaction. So that one you won't be seeing any longer, although it's going to resurface as one of our new business items later tonight, because that's part of our sewer rehabilitation also, is the remnants of that project. So I'll circle back to that a little later.
Exclamation point.
Oh, yeah.
There really is an exclamation point.
Okay.
He said thanks.
Yeah. So Roberts Mill Road, Broad Street reconstruction, pre-bid was held on October 13th. We did get 4 bids, I believe it was. And again, the recommendation from C.D.M. Smith, we emailed out late this afternoon. We just got that today. So we'll talk about that under new business. We did have to delay the bid opening a week because a last-minute question came in that we decided was important enough to address with an addendum that we had to bump the bid due date back a week to give bidders time to consider the addendum and make adjustments to their bids. So that's why it's a little bit last minute, but we wanted to try to still squeeze it in this month. Let's see. I do want to just make you aware of something. We've been dealing with not on my written report, but have been dealing with a grease buildup in the sewer main on East Baltimore Street in the 400 block. So Public Works has been working on it for a couple days, and it's proving to be a more difficult blockage to get rid of, that they get so far and then hit another slug basically of grease. So we're trying to track it upstream and determine the source to work with that property or those properties that are putting excess grease into the system. So our code does limit the, and honestly, I can't sit here and tell you what 80, milligrams per liter, I think, is the threshold for oil or something to go into the system. I don't know what that looks like, to be honest, but I'm sure it's not, dumping a frying pan full of bacon grease down the sink. So it's been a challenge, and we're seeing even in Meads Crossing at the, I'll say new pumping station, we're waiting for a vendor to come out and pump grease out of the trap in there that quickly. So it seems like, folks are not following what a lot of us would think is common sense, that, even for your own plumbing, you don't want to clog things up by pouring grease down your drains, but apparently we have a lot of folks through the city that are doing that. So kind of working on that. If we are able to track it to, a specific source or 2 or 3, we'll certainly be working with those property owners and advising them of the limitation as to what they're supposed to be putting into the system.
Spaghetti sauce jars.
So, yeah. So just wanted to call that to your attention in case you do hear anything, from the community about the backups. We've had some challenges out there. And the last thing I just wanted to just pose a quick question. We've had some discussions on the zoning office in recent years. A couple times the idea of a distillery or micro distillery has come up. Our code speaks to microbreweries and brew pubs as a special exception in downtown business, which is also then allowed in the general business district. But our code is silent on distilleries. So the question has come up again. So just wanted to kind of get your response on whether that's something that we should be entertaining. I think we were several years late to the party on microbreweries. Distilleries is a growing trend. So, if that's something we think we would like to see in the city, we may want to tweak the code and, probably just add that language to the same section that talks about microbreweries and brew pubs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Agreed.
So I didn't think there would be a problem getting consensus.
Yeah.
So
I don't partake in any of the micro distillery things, but it's a hot thing and we need hot things here in town. So
exactly.
let's make that happen, Captain.
I do have one question. Is there any sort of precedent for language that would cover all types of establishments like that?
They just keep
Do we
coming up
have to
with new
just
names for it. That's
Or do
the
we just
problem.
have to specify every single?
Right.
I think we should specify, but we should be a little more on the cutting edge when we do that.
Okay.
And we will do a little homework also. The section of the code that speaks to the microbreweries refers to, as licensed by a certain section of the annotated code of Maryland. If that section of the code is the same section that speaks to distilleries, maybe we kind of lump it under there without actually doing a text amendment. But we have a little homework to do on that.
Yeah.
But in the event that it is some different segment of the annotated code, I think we probably would be looking at a text amendment to add the distilleries. So
Could we maybe see that for introduction next month?
should be a quick fix.
I
if
would
needed.
think so.
Okay,
Okay.
all right,
That would be great.
okay.
I wanted to ask you, progress on Bollinger Park. Have we made any headway with the county regarding permits and such, approvals?
I believe we are still waiting on forest conservation, and we submitted a variance request for reduction of the sight line for the entrance. Essentially, there's no place along our street frontage that meets the county's current sight distance for the entrance. So the CDM Smith did not realize that they were going by an outdated specification in the county manual that had been updated. So the county now requires that the sight distance be adequate for a higher than posted speed on the street. So Fringer Road, I believe, is 35 miles an hour, so the sight line distance is supposed to be adequate for like a 40-mile-an-hour street. And I suppose that's realistic, recognizing that a lot of folks do, travel higher than the posted speed limit. But it was something CDM Smith was not aware of until the comment came back from the county roads department. So we did complete the application for, reduced sight line, and we're waiting to hear back on that.
Okay. Questions for the city manager on his report or the departmental reports? All right, Mr. Gullo, do you have a legal report for us this
Well,
evening?
the hour is late. We have more to do. I will save my time for the closed session. So,
Okay, very good. Moving into our new business this evening, we'll have a monthly financial report up for your approval on Monday. Are there any questions or concerns regarding that this evening? All right, I'll ask the same of the accounts payables. Everyone feel okey-dokey? All right, moving in for Monday evening, award of bid for the Roberts Mill Road Broad Street project. Mr. Weeper touched on this a little bit in his report. And go ahead and summarize for us, if you would, sir.
Okay, so to keep it short and sweet, the low bid of $3,484,217.34 was submitted by WF DeLauder and Sons. That is the recommendation of CDM Smith and Department of Public Works. That does come in a little under what we budgeted for the project, actually. So their bid was considerably lower than the others. And DeLauder has done work here in the city previously. Most recently, they were the primary contractor for the Sarah's Choice Roberts Mill Run Stormwater Management Pond retrofit that was over by O'Brien Avenue and incorporated the new segment of bridge. So, they were good to work with there, and they've also been contractor for, I think they were a subcontractor on our York Street pumping station. So, so they're a known entity for us, and the numbers look good, so.
All right, any questions regarding that suggestion, recommendation? Okay, we will seek council's approval on Monday evening. Then next, we'll have the award of bid for the sewer rehabilitation. And anything you want to share with us about that, Mr. Weeper?
Just to summarize CDM's memo, we did this in two contracts, contract one being the dig and replace portion, contract two being the cured in place lining, cured in place pipe. And we also broke it out into 3 separate areas in the event that the bids came back higher than what we had put in the capital improvement program for this year. So contract number 1, the dig and replace part, is low bid was $499,000, again by WF DeLauder and Sons. And on the lining contract number 2, the low bid was in situ form at $249,575.81, and those are the recommendations from CDM Smith. By Monday, I will have had a chance to sit down with our treasurer and just make sure that that we're aligned properly with what we budgeted. We did, and I don't want to drag this on too long, but when we did our first budget amendment for this year, where we rolled forward the dewatering project into FY23, which so not knowing what our final number was going to be at the close of FY22, we didn't automatically incorporate what was left in the FY23 budget because it was a moving target. So we waited and decided that we would do a budget amendment once we had all the year-end numbers. What we didn't remember to do was we had budgeted more money for the Meadowbrook Interceptor, and then determined that we would wait to do the lining part until we bid a larger amount of linear footage so we would get a lower price per linear foot. What we forgot to do, because we used that same project code for the part that's already done, we forgot to roll that in with our budget amendment. So we will be looking at a budget amendment in the near future to bring that from FY22 into FY23. But by Monday night, we'll have that all sorted out and make sure that we're covered with everything. But that's the recommendation, so hopefully we can move forward with both of those.
Very good. To the council, questions? Satisfied? We sound satisfied. All right, that will be up for awarding on Monday evening. Last under new business, we have an MOU from the Sheriff's Office regarding pawn, precious metal, and scrap metal dealers. If you've had a chance to read over the MOU, has this changed dramatically?
It's only changed a reference. It's already existing, and it referenced something that's out of date now.
Right.
So it's like a couple words.
Okay.
Actually, I think it was one word,
Yeah,
rapid.
right, exactly.
Yes.
So it's,
Yeah.
they already do it. I don't. they
Somebody
wanted-
took
They
over
wanted a new one,
Rapid,
and there was a new person
And,
that came
yeah,
in. That's
now
right,
they got to
so-
call them what they're supposed to be.
Right.
Now we're going generic, is that correct, instead of the? All right. Questions about that? I would think not. It's something we want. Very good.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, one item under new business, if I might. So in light of the seeming outcome of the election yesterday, I'd like to request some time on Monday night's agenda to say a few words, and also to submit my letter of resignation and the date at which it will be effective.
Very good. That will be on Monday evening then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely. Thank you. Begrudgingly. I didn't vote for you. No, I'm kidding. I will open it up to the floor for public comment on agenda items. Anything that was on the agenda this evening, you're welcome to come up and speak about. All right. Sounds like everyone is satisfied at the moment on that.
Mr. Mayor, just if I could,
You may.
with regard to the comments about the solar, we did look at the municipal parking lot off Riffles and Record Lane, and it was determined that that was not a viable option for Canopy Solar. Part of the factoring in there was that there aren't any city buildings that use much energy at that site. All we have back there is the garage, and all that's in there are,
The light bulbs are probably blown
right,
anyway.
4 light
so-
bulbs.
Be nice.
So, and we can update those to LEDs and, so, but we
Safe
did
half.
look at that as an option.
Okay. All right. Anyone else before I move on? All right, because I'm moving on. All right. I'm going to be seeking here in a moment a motion to adjourn and enter into closed session after I read this closing statement. Seeking to go into closed session in accordance to the Maryland Open Meetings Act, Title 10, Governmental Procedures, Subtitle 5, Meetings, Section 3305B. This meeting will be closed as closed only to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice. Citing 3305B7, topic is being MDE compliance, and consulting with our legal counsel to obtain legal advice as it relates to the MDE compliance. Does that suffice, Mr. Gullo? That's fine. Perfect, thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our open session, go into closed session. As a reminder, we will not reconvene in public session after the closed. Motion, please.
Motion to adjourn and then reconvene in closed session?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning the public session, going into closed session, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. We are unanimous. We are adjourned, and we'll reconvene in 9 minutes. Thank you all.